When I was 14, my parents decided it was time to send me to summer camp for a few weeks. Honestly, I had always been a very home-loving and unsociable child, and when they broke the news to me, I felt like I was being sent into exile. They believed this would help me connect with other children, as if it were the magical solution to my supposed anxiety. The thought of spending 2 long weeks surrounded by strangers in a faraway place terrified me deeply. I almost started crying. I even promised them I would do anything to make them drop the idea. I would improve my hygiene, try harder to be friendly, leave the house more often. I even offered to find a girlfriend, although no girl would have ever given me a chance, but all that was in vain. They refused to negotiate. They didn't ask for my opinion. They gave me an order. I was going to camp whether I liked it or not, and if they had to drag me screaming onto the bus, so be it. The night before I left, I cried myself to sleep, and on the ride to the bus, the tears flowed again. On the bus, surrounded by all the other children who were shouting and laughing, fear paralyzed me. A group of boys began to ask me what was wrong, but all I could do was stay silent, feeling more and more ridiculous. The question, "Are you special?" threw me completely off balance. I felt trapped and actually thought about running away at a rest stop, even though I had no idea where I would go. I was completely cornered. The first few days at camp were a disaster. I barely spoke to anyone, and the food was disgusting. At home, I could choose what to eat, but these terrible dinners in a cabin with 5 other children were a total shock for me. My anxiety was more intense than ever, especially during meals. But it wasn't just about the food. There were many girls who made me nervous, but one stood out in particular, Inara. She was Spanish or maybe from the Basque country or something similar, although I don't know if that's the same thing. I'm a disaster at geography. The fact is, she was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. She was popular, charismatic, and left me speechless. During lunch and dinner, I would secretly look at her out of the corner of my eye, but I made sure to look away as soon as she returned my gaze. When she actually caught me, I quickly focused on my plate as if nothing else in the world mattered. One day, she walked up to me, and my heart almost stopped. She smiled and asked if everything was all right and if she could sit next to me for a few minutes. I was speechless, unable to give a coherent answer. But she was so self-assured that she laughed and simply sat down opposite me. That moment was a mix of nervousness, excitement, and pure adrenaline. She spoke with a voice so sweet I would never forget it, and her accent sounded like music. She asked my name, where I was from, and other things, but I could barely process what she was saying. Yet the curiosity in her eyes gave me a huge boost. The envious glances of other boys in the cafeteria were a confidence boost I had never experienced before, although I still felt awkward. This interaction made me a little more comfortable in my own skin, and I was walking on air for the rest of the day. The confidence I gained from talking to her was like a breath of fresh air. Not that I was suddenly the king of the camp, but I managed to smile and even talk a little more to others. For the first time, the idea of being in this place didn't seem so terrifying. Sometimes, all it takes is a small push to take the first step. In this regard, the camp achieved its goal, although I still had a long way to go. The next evening at dinner, Inara came up to me again, and this time I managed to have a decent conversation. By the end of my first week, I had made 2 friends, 2 slightly weird but cool guys. It was right then that she asked me the question that would change everything. "Do you want to meet me by the lake tonight before the lights go out?" The thought of secretly meeting her by the lake filled me with a mixture of excitement and fear. It was strictly forbidden. Boys and girls were only allowed to interact during camp activities or in the cafeteria. Outside of that, nothing was allowed. That Inara would take this risk seemed unbelievable to me. I would have done anything to go home before, even if it was hell, but now, after meeting her, the idea of leaving the camp didn't seem so appealing anymore. The excitement coursed through me, making me even a little daring. Part of me was afraid of the meeting, but I decided I had to do it. So I devised a plan to get to the lake unnoticed. My friends wished me luck and gave me tips on how to handle the situation coolly, which only made me more nervous. When I finally reached the lake, my heart sank as I saw that Inara wasn't there. For a moment, I thought I had made a foolish mistake and that she wouldn't come. The fear made me hesitate, but I wanted to stay in case she did show up. After 5 minutes, then 10, I finally heard footsteps. I could hardly believe it when she emerged from the trees holding 2 towels. My heart raced, and I felt this was a small victory. There I was, ready to take a risk and talk to a popular girl. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to fit in a little in this camp world. I thought I might become one of the popular kids. But I had to be careful not to let it go to my head. She suggested we take off our clothes and go for a swim. At the time, I was so blinded by my crush on her that I didn't even consider whether it was a good idea. She asked me, and that was reason enough. In a moment of madness, we stripped down to our underwear and jumped into the water. The water was cold, almost icy, but somehow that helped me because I could pretend I was shivering from the cold instead of from nervousness, being in my underwear in front of such an incredible girl. Inara and I started swimming, trying not to make too much noise, just letting the moment flow amidst the chaos. She told me she swims at her school, a private school in her hometown, and she assured me she could hold her breath for a minute, which sounded impressive. Without thinking, I asked her if she wanted to show off her skills. She smiled with that self-assurance that made her so unique, and as she submerged, I started counting. But at 56 seconds, she surfaced, gasping and laughing. Her face was wet and radiant with joy, and that made me a little more nervous, but it was also wonderful to be part of this moment. All the anxiety of the week seemed to vanish in that instant, and with every passing second, I felt myself opening up to new possibilities and experiences I never thought possible. I couldn't believe it. 56 seconds. That was an impressive feat, especially for someone like Inara, who was a little smaller than me. When she asked me how long I could hold my breath, I replied that I didn't know but was ready to find out. As I submerged, I heard her voice, that sweet voice with its melodic accent, counting the seconds. I felt my lungs burn, but I was determined to hold on. Suddenly, I heard a sound next to me and was distracted by curiosity. A hand seized my neck, squeezing it, and I tried with all my strength to push the hand away. It really hurt. I couldn't see anything, and the pain on my neck was overwhelming. With every second, my air grew scarcer, and I started thinking I would actually drown. Panic engulfed me, but strangely, when I realized I wouldn't make it, a moment of calm came. Instead of fighting, I thought I just had to let go. The next thing I remember is waking up on the pier, coughing and spitting out water. An adult voice kept asking me if I could hear her, but I was numb and couldn't remember what had happened. When I looked around, I saw Inara crying while a counselor tried to comfort her. In that moment, I understood. I remembered the hand that had pushed me underwater and how I had gone from being the happiest boy in the world, hoping to enjoy a little alone time with Inara, to someone facing the possibility of death. I had no idea who had pushed me underwater, but I was sure Inara knew. Soon after, she confessed to the counselor what had happened. Apparently, it was all part of a brutal prank that she and a group of boys wanted to play on me, a little fun act, as they called it. But apparently, she had no idea it would get so serious that they would almost drown me. When she saw I was held underwater for a long time, Inara panicked and ran for help. But by the time the counselors arrived, there was already great chaos. Paramedics and police arrived shortly after, and as you can imagine, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. What was meant to be just a prank turned into a very serious matter, and the police called what happened an attempted murder. The children involved were arrested that same night, and the boy who actually pushed me underwater ended up in a juvenile detention center for a couple of years. The next day, my parents came to pick me up. I couldn't believe what had happened. In the car, my mother berated the head counselor while I tried to process everything. It was a mixture of relief, shock, disappointment, and also some resentment towards Inara for what she had done to me. Yes, after all the madness, I left the camp with mixed feelings. Not only had I developed a little as a person, but I had also learned a brutal lesson about what it means to be part of a group. Sometimes, children who seem friendly are not at all, and what seems like fun to them can be a nightmare for someone like me. I didn't cry when I left the camp, but I felt sorry for myself. It was a mess of emotions. I was happy to leave a place where I had almost died, but also sad to leave behind my first real friends, and especially Inara. Although she was part of the prank that almost cost me my life, it meant a lot to me that she cared enough about me to go get help when she realized what was happening. As crazy as it sounds in my 14-year-old mind, that was proof that she cared about me somehow. Today, of course, I think about it completely differently, beyond the fact that I didn't want to be killed. She played with my feelings and allowed a cruel prank against someone who was always only nice to her. Nevertheless, looking back, I think the near-death experience at camp was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because when I faced the fear of death, I realized it wasn't as horrible as I had imagined. There was a moment of acceptance and peace that gave me a new perspective on life. Since then, nothing has truly scared me. I learned that I could make friends and that it was worth being brave. I started doing things I thought I never could, like talking to girls, learning to skateboard, and practicing martial arts. I even lost a few kilos because I started hanging out and socializing with my new friends from school. The only major problem I've had since then is my fear of deep water. I haven't swum since that day, and the thought of being on a boat or cruise ship makes me sweat with fear. Despite everything, I have to say that the camp helped me overcome my social anxieties. Yes, it came at a price, but I am somewhat at peace with this whole experience. Now, I am no longer controlled by the fear that plagues many people, the fear of death, and maybe that helps me live a little more intensely than others. As we entered the bungalow that was to be our home for the next few weeks, I was overwhelmed. It was small but very cozy, with colors shining everywhere. In the middle of the king-size bed, which was at least 3 times the size of the one we had at home, stood a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket. "This is going to be amazing," I exclaimed, jumping onto the bed with a grin. Tommy followed me, though he looked a little uneasy. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked, still trying to get used to calling him that after 3 years of dating. He nodded, but the little crease in his forehead told me something was bothering him. "This place is amazing," he said. "I'm just wondering why it's so cheap. Do you think there are any hidden fees or something?" He joked, but deep down he was right. We had truly gotten a fantastic place for next to nothing. According to the website, this was because the hotel was new and wanted to attract more visitors, even if it meant losing some money for it. It all made sense. I also remembered hearing an old story about the island and its guardian, but I couldn't recall the details. "Let's not think about it. Let's explore this place," I said, taking his hand and pulling him out into the tropical heat. We were both dead tired from the overnight trip, but I was eager to find out what awaited us here. It didn't take long for us to find the resort's main reception. We had been taken straight from the car to our room, so this was our first impression of the hotel. "It looks pretty empty," we said simultaneously, exchanging knowing glances. "I thought there would be more people here," I muttered, then quickly corrected myself. "Well, at least we have plenty of space to ourselves. I bet we won't have to wait in line to eat or drink." Tommy smiled at me, but he still looked a little nervous. It was our first luxury vacation together, and we both wanted everything to be perfect. Being alone wasn't a problem, but somehow it felt strange. "Oh, excuse me," said a girl who worked there, interrupting us. Her name was Rebecca. She was a receptionist and appeared out of nowhere in front of us. I couldn't help but take a step back, wondering how long we had been standing around like two fools. "Oh, I didn't see you." I apologized, noticing how Tommy became even more nervous with her closeness. Quickly, I took his hand and squeezed it gently. I knew he sometimes felt uncomfortable meeting new people, and I couldn't blame him. "Don't worry, I apologize if it's so quiet," Rebecca said, with a voice that sounded memorized. "We expect a large group of guests soon, so most of the rooms will be filled. For now, you can explore the resort at your leisure. Whether we have 2 guests or 200, the facilities are always open." Some parts of the hotel looked more like a church or a temple, with strange paintings that seemed to depict saints, not just random people. But who was I to judge their style? I just wanted to enjoy my vacation. "Since you are here alone right now, why don't you check out the water? You can rent equipment here, whatever you need, and of course, you must try the restaurants," she suggested, smiling as if proposing an adventure. With a sense of curiosity and excitement, we decided to look around and discover all that this place had to offer. The vacation had just begun, and although Rebecca's presence was still on our minds, the anticipation of what was to come filled us with energy. "Did I just hear someone mention the Japanese restaurant?" I said to Tommy in a joking tone. He smiled, and we headed there. Everything I tried was delicious. I nodded in agreement, remembering the taste of the food. It felt great to be so pampered, but there was something about Rebecca's demeanor that seemed strange to me. She seemed to pace back and forth restlessly, as if she were uneasy. Maybe it was just the heat, I thought. "Let's check out the beach after this quick snack," I said to Tommy, who agreed. Rebecca said goodbye with a broad smile and wished us a lot of fun. As soon as we were gone, Tommy whispered in my ear, "What was up with that woman? That was weird. We were here to have fun after all, and that's exactly what we intended to do." As we walked towards one of the bars that supposedly offered snacks, I had a map we had found in our room. Although the resort wasn't crowded, it was easy to find our way around. "I think you're overreacting," I said to Tommy. "It's a new hotel, and Rebecca mentioned they are preparing for a large group." His hand felt warm, but it was trembling. "It's probably just a weird radio noise or something," I said to reassure him, although I wasn't sure myself. It was strange, I had to admit. "I want to see the beach first. We can surely stop at the beach bar and order fries," I suggested, but before I could say more, Tommy suddenly pulled me away. I felt bad about how anxious he was, but there wasn't much I could do. I was uneasy myself, but knew I had to stay strong so he would calm down. The beach was just as quiet as the rest of the resort. Even the sound of the waves hitting the shore sounded muffled, as if I had cotton in my ears. Tommy looked around with a strange expression. Although the beach was supposed to embody peace and beauty, it felt sinister at that moment, almost as if the wind were screaming. "This place is weird," Tommy muttered, taking a few steps backward. "Oh, come on, that's not true," I countered, rolling my eyes and trying to lighten the mood. But before I could add anything, an intense pain shot through my head and my vision went black. When I came to, I was kneeling in the shallow water, my hands and feet tied. Where was Tommy? Panic filled me as I looked around and realized he was nowhere to be seen. The situation felt surreal and terrifying at the same time. What was going on here? This wasn't the start of the vacation we had imagined. Desperately, I tried to remember how I had gotten here. My heart raced, and I strained my senses to find any clue. The soft roar of the waves seemed far away, and I tried desperately to organize the mess in my head. The beach, which had promised us paradise, a place of tranquility and joy, was now a place of torment. "Tommy," I called, but the echo of my voice was swallowed by the murmur of the sea. The absence of an answer intensified my panic, and I crawled towards the shore to try and loosen the ropes that held me captive. Suddenly, through the foam of the waves, I saw a movement, a shadow approaching from afar. Hope sprouted in me. "Tommy," I called again, but the figure moved towards me with disturbing calm. It was Rebecca, but she didn't have the friendly smile from before. Her face looked pale and rigid, and there was a disturbing intensity in her eyes. "You've arrived just in time for the ritual," she said, with a voice that seemed to echo over the sea. A shiver ran down my spine. "The ritual?" I asked, trying to comprehend as the panic gripped me more and more. She nodded slowly, her arms outstretched as if summoning something. "We must make a sacrifice to awaken the island's guardian. You and Tommy are the guests of honor," she added in a sarcastic tone. Terror paralyzed me, and suddenly it dawned on me that I had heard of the legend told here. The details had escaped me then, but now everything seemed real. "No, please," I pleaded, but she ignored my words and continued relentlessly. Just when I thought all was lost, I heard a scream. "Leave her alone." Tommy emerged from behind a tree and ran towards me with determination. He freed me from the ropes with a jerk. Rebecca looked surprised to see him, but the adrenaline gave me the strength to run to Tommy. Together, we fled into the jungle while Rebecca was close on our heels. The dense vegetation became our ally in that moment. We hid between some dry trunks, trying to lose her. As we caught our breath, we suddenly heard a faint whisper, a strange kind of song that sounded like an echo, distant and yet eerily present. "What should we do?" Tommy pleaded nervously, looking at me with fearful eyes. "We have to get out of here, find a boat or some way to escape," I replied. Feeling time running out, hours passed and night caught up with us. We were completely desperate and had no idea how to escape this nightmare. We didn't dare move for fear that Rebecca and her crazy followers were lurking somewhere in the darkness. Suddenly, we heard a familiar sound, the humming of a boat engine, which seemed to be coming from the beach. Tommy and I looked at each other, knowing this could be our chance to escape, provided it wasn't someone from the group hunting us. Knowing we couldn't hide forever, Tommy and I decided to take the risk. When we reached the beach, we saw a fisherman docked with his boat. Without hesitation, we told him everything and begged him to help us escape the island. To my surprise, he didn't look surprised. He just pursed his lips and slowly shook his head, as if he knew everything already but didn't approve of any of it. That was a good sign. The old man waved us onto the boat and immediately took us to the port. There, we called the police and told them everything that had happened. They sent some men to the island, but to our surprise, they found nothing unusual, no evidence of what we had described. They only brought back our belongings, and finally, we were able to return home. Yet, to this day, it remains a mystery what really happened on that island and what secrets it holds. I researched rituals or cults in the area, but found absolutely nothing, only reports of people drowning in those waters, all declared as accidents. But after what I experienced, I am convinced that those deaths were not random. Nevertheless, I didn't want to get further involved. I just wanted to resume my life and put this bitter experience behind me. Of course, we never return to that island, and every time we go on vacation, we feel that slight discomfort in the pit of our stomachs when we think about what happened to us then. It was an ordinary day in the 1980s when hiking suddenly became fashionable. I was working as a ranger in Yellowstone National Park at the time, and as part of my job, I was always informed about everything that happened in the forest. It was an evening in July, the 22nd to be exact, and I had just finished my shift. I was walking to my cabin when I saw a somewhat strange guy in a dilapidated pickup truck unloading a huge backpack. He was a thin white man, about 1.78 meters tall, with a bushy beard that made him look quite unkempt. He waved at me, and as I walked on, I thought it was a bit unusual to see someone entering the park so late. Normally, people arrive during daylight hours to set up their camp, but this guy looked like he was ready for an adventure. I didn't think any more of it and went on my way. The next day, I returned to my post and met my colleagues, Willie and Stan. I asked them about the strange guy from the day before, and Willie, the guy who always knew everyone, told me he was a professor with the last name Spencer, James Spencer. He was in the park for a few days to study plants. "Ah, no problem, just an enthusiastic guy," Willie said. It seemed like a reasonable explanation, so I dropped the subject. But the week passed and we saw no sign of the professor. This was not normal, usually. We waited an extra day before searching for someone who didn't return. As an experienced ranger, I knew it wasn't usually difficult to find someone, but something in the air told me this time would be different. On July 28th, we decided it was time to act. We informed the local police and put together a team of 10 rangers. The adrenaline began to flow as we ventured deeper into the forest. The search began with a knot in our stomachs. Although we knew every corner of the park, there was a strange feeling in the air, as if something wasn't right. After about an hour, we found something, the professor's tent. It was set up near a cliff. Not only was the tent there, but also his backpack, a sleeping bag, a few snacks, and a portable stove. Where the hell is the professor? I thought. Everything looked messy, as if he had left his things in a hurry. We looked around but found no trace of him. So we started calling his name, though with little hope. With every minute, the uncertainty grew heavier. As we surveyed the landscape, I felt an unease in the air. It was as if the forest held its own secrets. Every gust of wind and every rustle of the branches seemed to mock us. We went deeper and deeper, but the clues were sparse or non-existent. Suddenly, we heard a distant scream, one that sent icy shivers down our spines. Without hesitation, we ran in the direction the scream came from. When we reached a clearing, we found more than we expected. It was an eerie place where the silence was suffocating and the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My mind started racing. I wondered if the professor had found something he shouldn't have and had gotten into trouble there. With every step, the doubts grew, as did the discomfort. What really happened to James Spencer? In a moment, time seemed to stand still, and everything became blurred. The reality of the forest slipped through my fingers like sand, and there was a kind of warning in the air. Not everyone who goes into the wilderness returns. For some reason, that sentence echoed in my mind as if the forest itself were whispering it to me. The search turned into a nightmare, and I knew we had to hurry. Something dark was lurking in the gloom of the forest, and we could all feel it, even if none of us dared to say it out loud. It was only a matter of time before what was there caught up with us. We had found the professor's tent, and it seemed he had cooked there. It was his first camp and only about a mile from the park entrance. That made it clear that he had no idea how to survive in the wilderness. Even worse was that his equipment was left behind, as if he had abandoned it in a rush, taking only the bare necessities. When we saw the empty camp, alarm bells rang for all of us. Something was definitely wrong. We decided to split into groups and expand the search. We had to find this man before it was too late, so we contacted other campers who had been in the area the week before. Some mentioned seeing the professor, but he hadn't been sighted since his last day. The next morning, we requested air support. By now, almost 120 people were looking for the professor, but everything seemed in vain. The second day of the search passed without a trace of him. On the third day, when his family arrived at the park, the atmosphere became even more oppressive. Their concern was palpable, and it was heartbreaking to see his wife and children completely distraught. The sight of this family broke our hearts. Every time we looked into their faces, the burden on us grew heavier. 5 days passed, and there was no trace of James Spencer. Missing person posters were put up in the surrounding small towns. Typically, such a situation took a grim turn because after a while, the missing person was declared dead if they didn't show up. Despite all our efforts, Professor Spencer was never seen again. The search was called off, and of course, we all felt defeated. We realized that the fate of Professor Spencer would remain a mystery. Decades passed, and I continued my life in the park, but in late 2008, just a few months before my retirement, something happened that still sends a cold shiver down my spine. One night, as I was heading home after a long shift, a strange man suddenly appeared out of the woods. Edwin, a new ranger who was soon to replace me, noticed him at the same time as me. The man had long, tangled hair and a thick beard. Honestly, he looked like a homeless person, but when I looked closer at him, my heart stopped. It couldn't be, but was it possible? I immediately ran towards the man, and Edwin followed me, visibly confused. What's wrong? Who is this man? I asked myself, but I was frozen and couldn't utter a word. Seeing this man emerge alive from the woods was the last thing I expected. "Professor Spencer," I exclaimed. The man looked at me, his expression marked by confusion. I had so many questions, but first I had to make sure it was really him. "Are you Professor Spencer, James Spencer?" I asked. Handing him a towel, he nodded, and that was enough to make me feel as if time had taken a crazy leap. I was completely stunned, almost shocked. How was this possible? Where had this man been all these years? And more importantly, what had he done and why? Too many questions swirled in my head. I took Professor Spencer back to our cabin and gave him clean clothes. Then I asked him the most obvious question. "Where were you, sir?" But he just looked at me with the same confusion in his eyes and didn't say a word. He looked shocked. At this point, I asked Edwin to call the police and fetched warmer clothes for the man, as he looked completely exhausted. It didn't take long for 2 police cars to pull up in front of the cabin. The officers, 2 young men and an older officer who remembered the rescue operation from more than 20 years ago, recognized him immediately. What happened next was surreal. As the police asked the professor questions about the lost years, he kept repeating the same thing. "They took me. I don't know where, but then they sent me back." With that, our connection to the mystery of the professor ended. I have never heard from him again. Although many years have passed since then, I still wonder what really happened to Professor Spencer. To be honest, sometimes those who know the story ask me what I think happened to him. The truth is, I have no idea. Sometimes nature keeps secrets that are meant to stay in the dark forever. During the summer holidays of 2022, I had to spend an extended period in an Airbnb while my house was being renovated. Honestly, the place was more expensive than I had planned, so I ended up in a rather fancy apartment outside the city. It was part of a gated community with a pool, gym, and a beautiful concentric garden. There were some long-term residents, but most of the neighbors, like me, were Airbnb guests. After unpacking my things, I met my next-door neighbors, a young couple named Ethan and Lily. They seemed nice at first, but I had little interest in making friends there. We chatted for a while before I retreated back into my own space. However, I couldn't sleep that night. I'm used to a hard bed, and the new one was so soft it felt like it was swallowing me whole. I drifted off briefly, but then woke up again with intense pain in my lower back. Around midnight, I noticed a strange movement outside my window. I looked out and saw towards Ethan and Lily's house, where I had a direct view into their bedroom. They had their curtains open, and I could see them arguing loudly. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but even though I knew it wasn't nice to peer into other people's lives, I had nothing better to do. Besides, they couldn't see me. The longer I watched, the more heated the discussion became. They seemed to be yelling at each other and gesticulating wildly. Suddenly, Lily pushed Ethan away, and he reacted by pushing her back. My heart raced as I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, fearing that the situation might escalate. I had to be prepared to call the police if necessary, and indeed, things got out of control. I saw Ethan push Lily to the ground, and after a tense moment, she got up with a lamp in her hand. Ethan hurled a hurtful comment at her. And to my horror, Lily struck his head several times with the lamp. He immediately fell to the floor. I couldn't move. The shock was too great. I knew I should hide and call the police, but I had never experienced anything like this before. When Lily stood up, she dropped the broken lamp and suddenly looked in my direction. That's when I realized she was looking at me. She smiled, and that broke my shock. I quickly grabbed my phone on the bedside table and dialed the emergency number. Within 5 minutes, a patrol car pulled into the driveway of my apartment. With a pounding heart, I ran out to them and told them everything in one breath. My heart was still pounding as the first officer wrote down my statement and the second looked towards Ethan and Lily's house. I had no doubt. I was convinced they would find a body and Lily would be arrested for the murder of her husband. But just as I finished my story, the front door opened, and to my complete surprise, Ethan walked out, alive and well. He seemed completely unfazed, as if nothing had happened, and walked towards the police officers to ask what was going on. Lily also appeared and apologized to the officers for wasting their time. She claimed I had probably had a bad dream or something of the sort. Obviously, the police officers were anything but happy with me. They pointed out that false emergency calls are illegal and that I was lucky not to be arrested. Then they got into their patrol car and drove away. When the three of us were alone, Lily burst into peals of laughter. It turned out that she and Ethan liked to entertain their neighbors with morbid pranks. They traveled to different places and staged fake murders just to see how people reacted. Ethan pulled out an empty package of fake blood they had used, while Lily laughed incessantly. Ethan, however, didn't seem to find the prank as amusing. He looked almost embarrassed by what they had done. Honestly, I didn't find anything cute or funny about their behavior. It seemed childish and irresponsible to do such things. They could seriously get themselves or others into trouble. Without saying anything, I went back to my apartment. In the hours that followed, I tried to forget my strange neighbors and go back to sleep. It took a while, but eventually I succeeded. I would have slept through the whole night if a loud creaking sound hadn't woken me up. I opened my eyes and saw Ethan by my window. At first, I thought it was just another twisted prank by my neighbors, so I decided to confront him directly. "What the hell are you doing there?" I asked reluctantly. Ethan explained that he had run away. He said he had had enough of his wife and wanted to hide until the morning so Lily wouldn't find him. "No, thank you, I'm not getting involved," I replied sternly. Ethan looked disappointed and began to climb back out of the window. But then I heard a noise from the house next door that caught my attention. "Oh no, Lily is awake," Ethan cried, quickly ducking under my window. Shortly after, Lily turned on the light and looked towards my room. "Have you seen my husband?" She called. "Please don't betray me," Ethan whispered from the floor. Honestly, I was about to inform her, but instead I managed to lie. "No, he's not here," I said. Lily stared at me as if she was trying to figure out if she could trust me. Finally, she gave up and went back into her house. "Why don't you just talk to your wife?" I asked Ethan. "I can't," he mumbled. "She always makes these morbid jokes about killing me. Maybe it was funny at first, but now she says if I ever leave her, she'll really do it." I left him lying on my carpet without a blanket or pillow, closed my eyes, and surprisingly immediately fell asleep. I wasn't woken up for the rest of the night until a loud bang jolted me awake. It was daylight, and the sun was streaming through the window. When I got up, I saw Ethan's feet sticking out next to my bed. He was still sleeping on the floor. The noise must have come from someone else. I stumbled towards the front door, which was where the sound had come from. Just as I got there, the door sprang open, and a police officer burst in, gun pointed at me. "Hands up," he shouted. Confused, I raised my arms. I wanted to throw myself on the floor, as I knew from movies, but this time I stayed standing. The officer told me to stay there while he went into my room, through the half-open door. I heard the officer calling for backup. I peered in cautiously and saw him bending down towards Ethan. My body froze. Ethan had a knife sticking out of his face. This was no longer a joke. He was definitely dead. I wondered how this had happened and how Lily had gotten into my apartment without waking me up. The police officer turned to me with a serious look. Did you think you could cover your tracks by reporting a fake murder yesterday? You knew this man was going to die. I had no idea how to answer that. At that moment, I looked out the window and saw Lily standing outside next to another police officer. She was crying and hugging him, but she stopped for a brief moment to wink at me. That was her. She killed him. I cried, but the officer didn't believe me and put handcuffs on me. As he read me my rights, he led me out of the apartment. Outside, I saw Lily shedding her tears. Almost a perfect acting performance. She came closer and said in an almost convincing tone, "I want to see him. I need to see his face." The officer ignored her and she leaned against the window of the police car. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. "This has nothing to do with you. I waited for bail while they prepared my trial. Now everyone believes I am guilty." Lily had left enough evidence to put me behind bars for a long time. When my court day finally comes, I will have the opportunity to tell my side of the story, and I pray that someone, somewhere, decides to listen to me. Hello, my name is Tarek. I am a Bosnian immigrant and have been living in the United States for 13 years, but the story I want to tell happened in my hometown of Shanika in Bosnia. There, my father and I had a tradition of going fishing every weekend on the Drina River. We spent hours in our boat, fighting to catch the biggest fish we could. My father truly loved fishing, just like my grandfather before him. For me, it was a fantastic activity that brought me great joy as a child, especially because I could share those moments with my father. I thought it was something we would always do together, but these fishing trips also led to the worst experience of my life. Over the years, I heard strange stories about things that had happened on the Drina River where we fished. These stories became part of the folklore of our small community. My grandfather, also a fisherman, often warned me, "Be careful, my son, the Drina River is a dangerous place." I took it seriously, but like many things from my childhood, I only considered it old tales and superstitions. But everything changed on one fateful afternoon. That day, a strong wind was blowing, and although my father wasn't feeling well, he decided that fishing would do him good. It didn't take long for the sky to darken and gray clouds to cover us. I remember the smile on my father's face. "Every good fisherman knows that rain brings good fish," he said, and I smiled back, even though I was shivering and wasn't entirely convinced that fishing in the rain was a great idea. But I didn't want to criticize him, so we took our boat and headed out onto the river, casting our fishing rods. Soon it began to rain heavily, but something strange happened. The water was eerily calm, as if the river were at peace despite the rain. I found it strange, but decided not to worry. After a while of rain, we noticed we hadn't caught a single fish, which was very unusual. Normally, we always caught something, even if the weather wasn't cooperating. This lack of fish reminded me of what my grandfather always said about the river. It was moody with our family. Frustrated, I remarked to my father that maybe the river just didn't have any more fish. He laughed and was about to answer when suddenly, something gigantic hit our boat from below. The impact left us both shaken, and the boat began to sway violently. My father was just as confused as I was. He turned to me and told me to try and observe what was going on while he went into the water to check. In that moment, panic overcame me. I didn't want to be left alone in the boat, let alone have my father jump into the water while this thing that had hit us was still out there. I began to question his decision. It was dangerous. We knew the Drina River had no crocodiles or dangerous creatures, only fish, but this uncertainty made me nervous. I didn't want my father to take a risk. My father, however, seemed determined to catch the mythical creature told about in the town, the so-called Queen Drina, a giant fish that supposedly could make boats sway. But before I could say more, the boat was hit hard again, and I lost my balance. I fell directly into the icy water. As my skin touched the water, the cold shot through me and I started shaking. I heard my father calling my name from the boat, so I started swimming towards him. Luckily, I was a good swimmer, and it didn't take long to get there. As I got closer, I heard my father cry out in relief, "That's my boy." But just as I thought everything would be fine, I felt a movement in the water. I looked down and saw something gigantic moving directly beneath me. In that moment, my heart stopped. Was it the Queen Drina? The story I had heard as a child was becoming reality right before my eyes. I started swimming towards the boat at full speed, now completely panicked. Finally, I reached the edge of the boat and saw the relief on my father's face. He kept telling me to hurry, but just as I reached out to grab his hand, I felt a cold pressure on my chest. Something was pulling me into the depths. Suddenly, I found myself completely paralyzed, unable to move. Although I tried to move my arms and legs, nothing worked. Right at that moment, I started hearing a strange murmuring. At first, I thought I was losing my mind due to lack of oxygen, but then I saw something that froze me. Floating in front of me in the water was a figure, a woman, or so it seemed. Her skin was gray and flabby, as if she were decomposing, and she hung like an old rag in the water. The sight was horrifying, and when she opened her mouth, I started hearing her voice. It was so clear, as if she were at the surface, which scared me even more, knowing it was impossible to hear anything underwater. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but her voice echoed clearly in my head, a sound I haven't forgotten to this day. Suddenly, I felt her cold, scaly hands wrap around me, pulling me deeper. My lungs felt heavy, as if filled with lead. In that moment, I accepted that this might be my end and that there was no escape. But just as I was about to close my eyes, I felt hands pulling me out of the water, dragging me to the surface. When I opened my eyes, I saw my father desperately shouting, "Talk to me, son. Are you all right?" His expression was full of worry, an expression I had never seen on him before. I started coughing up water incessantly while trying to move my arms and legs, but I couldn't. My eyelids felt heavy, so I closed them for a moment, but when I opened them again, he was no longer by my side. He was gone. I wanted to call out for him, but my voice failed. I felt weak, and within minutes I lost consciousness. I woke up at home and was told that I had been found floating in the river. I couldn't move for weeks, but gradually, I regained mobility in my arms and legs. But I noticed something strange about my body. A mark on my chest, exactly where the creature had touched me. I didn't tell my family what I had seen that day, fearing they would think I was crazy. Instead, I invented a story about a strong wind that had overturned us and how my father had saved me. The most painful and horrifying thing about this experience was that my father disappeared that day. It wasn't until 6 months later that he was found washed up on the riverbank. The police said he had drowned, but my family had doubts. My father was a great swimmer and knew the river like the back of his hand. Something wasn't right. When I saw his body, I noticed that he also had those marks on his chest, the same ones I had. Fear overcame me as I realized he had been caught by the same creature as I was, but for some reason I had survived and he hadn't. After the incident and my father's funeral, my family decided to move to the United States for a fresh start. Although 13 years have passed since then, it feels like yesterday to me. I carry a heavy load on my chest, as if it is a burden I must carry with me. But in recent weeks, I have decided to tell my story. This is the first time I have said it out loud. I know many won't believe it and will think I'm crazy, but I know I'm not. Every time I look in the mirror, I see the mark on my chest. It reminds me that I am still sane. What I saw that day on the river, on our last fishing trip with my father, will never leave me. The experience of horror continues to live within me. Although I try to move forward, I know that this creature, whatever it is, will always be a part of my story. The shadow of what happened haunts me. By sharing my story here, I hope to find a little relief, a way to make this burden a little lighter. In the summer of 2018, my parents thought it would be a good idea to send me to a camp in Utah. It was a camp with a group of boys and girls from different schools who were divided into groups under the supervision of counselors. The girls were housed on the left side of the camp, the boys on the right. We were all teenagers between the ages of 13 and 15, so you can imagine how uncontrolled our hormones were. The boys spent all their time flirting with the girls, and the girls enjoyed the attention. Meanwhile, because I was always a loner and not at all outgoing, I felt a bit excluded, like someone running behind the bus. But everything changed when I met Angelina. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. I was sitting behind a tree trying to build a slingshot with a branch when I heard a girl scream, "Give me my glasses back." Curious, I looked over and saw Shuck, a boy from my school who was a real jerk, bothering Angelina. Shuck was a bully who always used his size to pick on others. Angelina, with her hair in two pigtails and braces, looked lost and vulnerable at the mercy of this brute. So I stood up, walked over to Shuck, and knocked the glasses out of his hand. "Hey, leave her alone," I said. Shuck never messed with me. We were about the same size, and in the past, we had trained martial arts together. Although he never talked about it, I had defeated him several times. "Wow, looks like someone has a girlfriend," Shuck said, laughing as he walked away, splashing mud on Angelina's pink dress. "Thanks for helping me," she said. "Ignore him, he's an idiot." "I'm Jack, by the way," I replied. She smiled and said, "I'm Angelina, nice to meet you." That's how our friendship began. Angelina and I spent the day together, talking and exploring the camp. But at night, during the bonfire, something strange happened. While we were enjoying a delicious roasted chicken that the counselors had prepared, she suddenly stood up and went into the woods. A few minutes passed, and she didn't come back, so I decided to look for her. I went down to the lake and found Angelina, to my surprise, next to Shuck. No one else was there. At first, I thought he was harassing her again, but then I saw her give him a kiss on the cheek in an unexpected moment. I was shocked. Minutes earlier, he had made her cry, and now I saw her smiling with him. Girls are a mystery I will never understand. I went back to camp, feeling strange, and went to sleep without another word. The next morning, my roommate Carl woke me up with a scream. "Man, wake up, they killed Shuck in the woods." I struggled to respond. "What are you saying?" I asked, still half asleep. "Yeah, the camp leaders found his bloody body under a tree this morning." I had a strange feeling in my stomach. In the evening, I decided to go to Angelina's room to talk to her about what had happened. I felt almost obligated because I was the only one who had seen Shuck with her before he died. But when I knocked on her door, I heard her roommates laughing at her. They opened the door and called out, "Angie, your boyfriend is here." Although the situation was a little embarrassing, it got even weirder when one of them mocked. "How are you going to make out with your boyfriend if you can't even change in front of us?" They laughed loudly while Angelina turned red and stood motionless in the room, completely embarrassed. I felt bad for her. "It's okay," I said, hugging her to comfort her. I didn't want her to feel bad, so I didn't mention anything about Shuck. We spent the rest of the day planting trees, and to my surprise, she was smiling again later. Later, Angelina came up to me, and with a mischievous look, she said, "Jack, you are my only friend here. Would you help me play a trick on Camille?" I stood there, thinking for a moment. Camille was the girl who had teased her that morning. "What do you have in mind?" I asked hesitantly. She led me to the girls' bathroom, and we stood in front of a window. "All you have to do is lift me up so I can climb in there," she said. Without much thought, I lifted her onto my shoulders as she requested. But as she climbed through the window, I noticed a beehive near the curtain and warned her to be careful. But instead of abandoning the prank, she threw the beehive into the bathroom. Immediately, thousands of bees filled the room. Angelina closed the window as quickly as possible, and we heard Camille's piercing screams from the other side. In that moment, we looked at each other and ran away without hesitation before anyone could see us. When we finally reached a secluded place, I was shocked. "What did you just do?" I shouted at her. "That was a sick joke. Our friendship is over." I was angry and couldn't believe she had done something like that. As my anger grew, I remembered seeing her with Shuck the night of his death. "I know what you did, Angelina. You were with Shuck before he died." In that moment, her eyes widened with surprise and fear, but I didn't wait for an answer and rushed away. The night passed, and Camille ended up in the infirmary, unconscious from pain. The next morning, I decided I should tell Mr. Russell, our counselor, about Angelina. Something wasn't right with her. But that night, a thunderstorm rolled in, and we were sent to our cabins early. My roommate Carl was out with friends, so I was alone. Around 1 a.m., I woke up and felt a heavy weight on my chest. My eyes were blurry, but I could make out Angelina on top of me, with a disturbing smile and a knife in her hand. "I thought we were friends, Jack," she whispered. Before I could react, she raised the knife, ready to stab, but I reacted instinctively and pushed her off my bed onto the floor. She screamed like a maniac, but didn't give up. She lunged at me again, trying to stab me. We struggled, and I was surprised by how strong she was. In the middle of the chaos, she tried to bite me, and I grabbed her hair to keep her mouth away from me. Then, the unimaginable happened. Her wig fell to the floor. "What have you done, Jack?" she screamed in horror. Her body began to tremble, and in a few seconds, she collapsed on the floor. In panic, I ran to the counselor's cabin and told Mr. Russell everything that had happened. He called Angelina's family and the police. What I found out next was shocking. Angelina was actually a boy named Albert. After the tragic death of his twin sister in an accident, his mother had forced him to live in her role. His mother, overwhelmed by grief and madness, had physically and psychologically abused Albert, forcing him to live as his deceased sister. These years of abuse had broken him and turned him into the monster he became. Albert was eventually admitted to a juvenile rehabilitation center where he was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. I truly felt sorry for him because deep in my heart, I knew it was his mother who had destroyed him. She had made him what he was, but the truth remains that this experience deeply affected me. I never attended a summer camp again. The summer of 2018 left deep scars on me, and I struggled to trust girls for years. This summer changed my life forever. I was just recovering from the glaring sunlight that hit me directly in the face after 5 hours on the beach. Dark spots and bright shapes danced before my eyes. Honestly, though, I was glad to have gotten a nice tan after my second day in Cancun. The resort I had chosen for my vacation was a dream come true. It was everything I could have imagined, and I even thought about coming back. While I was waiting at the reception to get my room key, I heard the murmur of the waves lapping the shore, and the ocean breeze gently wafted towards the entrance, which was decorated with beautifully carved wooden beams. "One moment, please," said the receptionist, a plump man with a shaggy beard and a very friendly smile. His gaze seemed to sparkle with joy as I smiled back and brushed my hair out of my face. The man leaned over the counter and began drumming on it with his fingers while he looked up my name in the book. These rhythmic knocking sounds were almost hypnotic, and I thought I definitely needed a break. "Stephanie," he asked, tearing me out of the trance-like state the drumming of his fingers had put me in. I nodded quickly, and his smile broadened even more. He stepped back from the counter, looked underneath, and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package containing my belongings. I thanked him politely, taking my clothes and my room key. In my head, everything revolved around fun and relaxation. I had worked so hard all year that I truly deserved this time off and wanted to make the most of it before returning to my everyday life. But this tranquility was suddenly interrupted when I arrived in my room. I was just about to shower and enjoy the rest of the day when there was a knock on the door. Confused because I wasn't expecting anyone, I asked, "Who is it?" Then he cleared his throat and said, "You forgot something." I felt a little suspicious as I mentally checked what I had with me and hesitated to open the door as I was only wearing a towel. "I'm coming in," he suddenly announced, and to my surprise, the man entered before I could say anything. I was shocked. The air caught in my chest, and I felt a lump in my throat moving from side to side. I didn't know how to react and was paralyzed for a few seconds between discomfort and fear. "What the hell are you doing here?" I cried as I saw him close the door behind him. He said nothing, but contorted his face into a smile that gave me an uneasy feeling. I tried to stand firm, but the breeze coming in carried the smell of his skin, which turned my stomach. The room was spacious, but suddenly felt too small and oppressive. The four walls seemed to be closing in. My question went unanswered for a moment while our eyes met. The air felt heavy, and I started gasping for breath. He noticed how my eyes darted between him and the door and smirked wryly. Then I swallowed, realizing that his intentions were not good. I opened my mouth to scream again, but stopped when I saw him put his hands into his pockets. A moment later, he pulled something out, a razor blade. The blade glittered in the light streaming through the window, and my heart sank with the realization that I was in a situation I couldn't handle. Up to this point, everything in my vacation had been relaxed and beautiful, but from this moment on, it turned into a nightmare. My knees trembled under my weight while my bare feet stuck to the floor. He put a finger to his lips and said, "Stay calm and cooperate, then no one gets hurt, but if you cause trouble." He paused and pointed the blade at my stomach before letting it slice through the air. Although he didn't say anything more, the threat in his eyes was clear. Suddenly, it felt like my life was flashing before my eyes. I clenched my fists to stay calm and slowly backed away while pleading with him to spare me. But he kept coming closer, step by step, like a predator cornering its prey. To my left was the bathroom, and although I knew it could be a trap, my mind worked faster than I could act. "Please," I repeated softly, taking another step back. He menacingly ran his fingers over his lips and said, "Let me explain what happens if you cause trouble. I will ram this knife into your belly, cut out your guts, and chop your body into small pieces. Then I'll throw them into the ocean in the middle of the night where the fish will devour them. No one will ever know what happened to you." The way he held the knife, his determined look, and every firm step he took towards me made me understand that he was serious. It was no game. He had done this before. In that moment, panic overcame me, and without thinking, I ran to the left, straight into the bathroom. I felt his hot breath on my neck, getting closer and closer. Suddenly, a stabbing pain shot through my hand. His blade had hit me. Fortunately, the wound was superficial, but the blood started flowing. Nevertheless, I managed to reach the bathroom door and slam it shut behind me before he could catch me. Inside, I screamed for help, pushing against the door with all my might while he tried to break it open from the outside. In that moment, my life hung by a thread. Everything happened so fast I could barely think while sobbing and screaming for help. I desperately searched for something in the bathroom to use for defense but found nothing. My gaze fell on the bathtub, and I couldn't help but imagine myself lying dead in it while he dismembered my body. He kept rattling the door and threatening me with cruel words while I frantically held onto the door. It was the only thing between me and certain death. Suddenly, I felt the pressure on the door ease. He had retreated briefly. but in the next moment he ran at the door again with full force. In my desperation, I prayed that the door would hold. I closed my eyes and tried to control my breathing. I was close to giving up for a moment. I thought about negotiating with him and doing what he demanded to survive, so desperate was I. But then something unexpected happened, something I never could have imagined. Overwhelmed by fear and nerves, I decided to open the door. I ripped it open just as he arrived at full speed to ram the door. His momentum was so strong that he couldn't stop in time. He hit the ceramic of the bathtub with his face so violently that a loud crack was heard. His body collapsed motionless. I was stunned for a moment, but when I saw that he wasn't moving, I went closer to check. He lay face down, a bleeding wound on his forehead, and his neck was in a strangely twisted position. Without wasting time, I ran out of the room to get help. Another hotel guest alerted the police. When the officers arrived, I explained to them what had happened. They confirmed that the man was dead. I had to stay in the city while the situation was resolved. But my statement was quickly proven true. The police took the knife and confirmed that only his fingerprints were on it. The authorities ruled it an accident, and I was completely cleared of any responsibility. This decision was a relief, but my vacation was completely ruined. All I wanted was to go home and forget this terrible event. Nevertheless, I am very aware that I am one of the lucky people in the world. I am eternally grateful to God for preserving me from a cruel death. Family vacations had always been our tradition. Usually, it was my wife, our 2 children, and me, but this year we decided to bring our dog Max because no one could look after him. At first, I was hesitant to take him, fearing the trip might scare him, but I never would have thought that without him, I wouldn't have noticed the looming dangers that awaited us. On the first day at the beach house we had rented, the children were over the moon. They ran along the shore, building sandcastles, while my wife and I enjoyed the sun and kept an eye on Max, who was splashing in the waves. At first, everything was perfect, but as time went on, a strange feeling came over me. I don't know how to explain it, but it was as if someone was watching us all the time. I didn't know exactly when it started, but this feeling intensified with every hour. I told myself I was just imagining it, as my family was obviously enjoying the vacation to the fullest, so I decided not to say anything. One night, I decided to go for a walk. The children and my wife were fast asleep in the house, and I felt exhausted. The streets were dark and, to my surprise, deserted. The place felt strange. Suddenly, I felt that sinister gaze on me again. I looked around, but no one was there. That was the moment I decided to turn back. I didn't want to stay outside for a second longer. But suddenly, Max stopped abruptly, pricked up his ears, and began to growl in a way I had never heard from him before. His body tensed up as he stared into the darkness, and my heart began to beat faster. If I was paranoid before, Max's behavior didn't make things any better. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, trying to calm him down with petting, but it didn't work. Max went wild, barking madly, and tried to break free from the leash. Finally, he managed to get loose and ran away into the darkness. In that moment, I didn't care if someone was watching us. I just felt like we had to get away from whatever was scaring Max so much. If you have a dog, you know that they often sense danger long before you do. So I ran after him as fast as I could while his barking echoed through the night. I didn't know where we were running and was afraid of losing him and losing sight of him. Fortunately, I caught up with him after he had run about a block and a half. He was standing still, but still barking and staring into a dark alley. When I looked there, a cold shiver ran down my spine. A dark, shadowy figure was watching us. My body froze with fear. The figure had blurred features, but it was obvious that it was watching us. My heart stopped for a moment. I tried to calm myself down and tell myself it was a homeless person or a couple of teenagers. but its gaze was fixed on me, fearless and intrusive. Perhaps it was the paranoia of the moment, but I felt an oppressive presence, as if I were prey before a hunter. Suddenly, the figure moved quickly towards us, and my heart skipped a beat again. I grabbed Max by the collar and ran back to the beach house as fast as I could while adrenaline rushed through my entire body. Soon, I realized I wouldn't make it home in time, so I decided to take shelter in a nearby public restroom. My hands were shaking as I closed the door behind me. I reached for my cell phone to call the police, but my blood froze as I realized. No phone. No, no, no. Where is my phone? After a few minutes of desperate searching, I realized I had probably lost it while running. I had been wearing shorts with loose pockets that didn't have zippers, and the phone must have fallen out, but that wasn't important now. From outside, I suddenly heard a loud banging on the door and realized that the stalker was trying to get in. Max was just as scared as I was. He barked nervously while the tension in the air grew thicker. After a while, however, he ducked down and remained hidden in a corner of the restroom. The night crept by slowly, and my fear grew with every passing second. After several minutes of silence, the knocking finally stopped. But every now and then, I could see a shadow behind the door. It could have been a passerby, but the possibility that it was the stalker left me no peace. Finally, overwhelmed by exhaustion and fear, I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the light in the bathroom was on and the door was open. My heart raced faster than ever before because, to my horror, I realized Max was no longer with me. "Max, where are you?" I called desperately, feeling a shiver run over my skin. In that moment, I heard a faint laugh, an eerie echo that only amplified my fear. But then I grasped it with terror. This laugh wasn't coming from outside, it was right next to me. The light shining in from outside was bright enough to reveal a figure in the corner near the door. Its face was obscured by shadows, but an insane grin was visible, and its yellow eyes fixed on me. It was the man who had been chasing me, and now he was only a step away from me. Desperate, I ran towards the bathroom door, but before I could open it, I felt a cold, firm hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and before I could react, an invisible force pushed me back. I fell to the ground while the man's laughter echoed in my ears like a painful refrain. I scrambled up, full of adrenaline, and ran out of the restroom. The pursuer didn't try to stop me. He just kept laughing, a crazy, piercing laugh that I couldn't forget. I ran towards the beach house without looking back and finally felt the danger behind me disappear. When I reached the house and burst in, I saw Max, safe and sound, as if he had been waiting for me. My heart was still racing, but the relief of seeing him again was overwhelming. I immediately called the police and told them everything that had happened to me. When they arrived, they found no trace of the man who had been chasing me. However, they found my cell phone lying on the ground. The screen was cracked, but it still worked, just in time to play a video showing Max barking at the pursuer. I watched the video over and over, trying to understand what had happened that night. Despite everything, I tried not to dwell too much on these memories, but every time I thought about the next vacation, I looked for excuses to take my family somewhere else. Every night, lying next to my wife in bed, I couldn't help but think about it. The cold grip, the shadowy eyes, the insane laughter, all of it played out in my head. What would have happened if he hadn't let me go? The only certainty I had was that I was only here because he had decided to let me live. If something like this ever happens again, I don't know if I will be so lucky this time. In the early summer of 2022, my parents finally ended their strained separation and the custody battle that had been a complete mess. The judge decided that we would spend the summers with our father, who had moved from Portland to San Diego. On the first day of summer, my uncle Josh came to our house to pick us up, as our father had to work and had asked Josh to take us. My brother Jadon immediately jumped into the car. He had heard so much about San Diego that he was more excited than a kid in a candy store. I, on the other hand, wasn't really thrilled about the idea. I had just turned 17 in June and would have preferred to spend the summer with my friends, enjoying the freedom at home. The plan was to drive along the Pacific coast from Oregon to San Diego in a week. Uncle Josh said he had always wanted to make this trip, and so we sat in the car. At first, the scenery was breathtaking. The view of the ocean was definitely Instagram-worthy. But after a while in the passenger seat, looking out the window, the landscape began to seem a bit monotonous. "How about burgers for dinner?" Josh asked, snapping me out of my trance. I pulled the headphones out of my ears and replied, "Yeah, sounds good. What about you, Jadon?" I turned around and saw that my brother was so engrossed in his video game that he didn't even flinch. But just as I looked out the window again, I noticed a man in a cowboy hat on the side of the road. The man was wearing old clothes and a red checkered bandana around his neck. He was hitchhiking on the side of the road, not even looking at him. "Hey, Jadon, put the game away for a minute and look out the window. You're missing interesting things," I said. "That looks weird," he replied. "I didn't think there were farms around here." "That was a hitchhiker," I remarked. "He looked like a cowboy. How cool, a cowboy hitchhiking in the middle of the night." "Interesting," Jadon said. "Maybe he has a horse," I joked. "If he had a horse, he probably wouldn't be hitchhiking, would he?" Jadon said with the typical logic of a gamer. I looked forward again, and to my surprise, I saw the same cowboy again, standing on the side of the road ahead of us. "There he is again," I exclaimed. "Who is this guy?" We drove past him, and I looked in the rearview mirror to see him one more time, but he had disappeared. "That is so strange," I muttered. I was so lost in thought that I didn't even notice Jadon tapping me on the shoulder. "Wow, you're a little paranoid, aren't you?" he said, laughing as he continued looking out the window. A few minutes passed in silence, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing. This is weird. Before I could think about it further, I looked out the window again and saw him again, far enough ahead that the other passengers could notice him too. "Look, there he is again," I said excitedly. We drove past him, but neither Josh nor Jadon said anything. Shortly after, we passed an old sign pointing to a ghost town. Soon my gaze fell on a banner announcing that a craft fair was taking place in the town. "Look, a fair, that could be fun. Can we stop and stretch our legs?" I asked Uncle Josh. "I bet they have food too," Jadon added. Josh agreed. And we drove into the parking lot of this town in the middle of nowhere. When we got there, I noticed that quite a few people were around. I tried to ignore the strangers around me, but I couldn't help but notice that many of the men were dressed just like the cowboy I had seen on the road, including the red checkered bandana. My curiosity grew with every step. Something strange was going on here, and somehow I had a feeling that we would soon find ourselves in a mess we couldn't escape from. While I was thinking about it, Uncle Josh bought corn on the cob for us at a nearby stand. He handed me one, but I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice until hot butter ran down my arm. "Let's sit on this bench," he said, but I only nodded as I continued thinking. Jadon was talking to one of the cowboys near the food stand. Next to him stood a beautiful black horse that looked like something out of an old Western movie. Jadon had always loved horses. He dreamed of learning to ride one day. As I watched them, Jadon finished the conversation and came back, but I recognized that the cowboy he had been talking to was the same one I had seen on the road earlier. That made me flinch, and the corn on the cob in my hand almost slipped to the ground. I just managed to catch it. But when I looked up again, the cowboy had disappeared. Jadon sat down next to me, his face smeared with butter and corn residues everywhere, while he enthusiastically told me about the cowboy and the horse. Uncle Josh joined us and said, "You've been in the car nonstop for 2 days. How about we stop in Santa Cruz tomorrow? We could go to the beach and rent bikes. There's a boardwalk there. Does that sound crazy?" Suddenly, I spotted him again. this time. He was standing near one of the log cabins. I couldn't resist and cautiously walked towards him, unsure if he would still be there when I arrived. My hands were shaking as I got closer. Finally, I reached out to touch him, but at that moment, I realized it was just a sign. I burst out laughing loudly. "Oh my God, I'm such an idiot. What am I doing here?" I continued laughing, thinking that all these cowboys I had seen were probably part of a promotional campaign for this place. Suddenly, I noticed that Uncle Josh had a shocked expression on his face and was pointing at the entrance of a log cabin. Inside was a small museum dedicated to the family who founded the town. On the back wall hung a mural, and there he was, the same cowboy we kept seeing, along with his 6 sons. Josh then pointed to the picture of the cowboy's wife. I was stunned. It was like looking into a mirror. The woman in the painting looked exactly like me, only in women's clothing from a bygone era. I couldn't believe it. My gaze wandered to the door of the log cabin, and there he stood again, the cowboy. He respectfully tipped his hat with a gesture and then disappeared. I was paralyzed, unsure what to make of it all. Was this a cosmic joke or something much deeper? In that moment, everything began to make sense. This wasn't just strange. It was something bigger. Somehow, this fair, this place, and all this craziness were mysteriously connected to my life. Questions swirled in my head as I tried to figure out what it all meant. Although it wasn't the right time, I am sure that one day I will find out the truth behind this crazy mystery. I remember this day feeling strange, as if a heavy cloud hung over everything. It was a typical day at the Haddon Sun Resort in Krabi, Thailand. Music was playing by the pool, and people were laughing while enjoying the warmth. But something was bothering me. I had to visit room 247. It had caught my attention that morning because the "Do Not Disturb" sign had been on the door for days. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, they were on vacation, and everyone deserves a little privacy. But there I was, with my cleaning cart next to me, noticing that eerie silence emanating from the room. I called out several times to announce my presence, but I heard nothing, only this dense silence that you could almost feel and that made your skin crawl. I peered in and noticed that the door was slightly ajar. What's going on here? I asked myself as a shiver ran down my spine. Slowly, I pushed the door open, and the darkness swallowed me. The curtains were all drawn as if they wanted to hide something. "Sir, I'm from housekeeping," I called out, hoping for an answer, but all I got was more silence. As I entered the room, I felt like I was stepping into another dimension. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it. My eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness, and I could see the unmade bed, the rumpled sheets, and a few pillows scattered on the floor. Shoes lay haphazardly on the carpet, as if someone had taken them off in a hurry. A strange smell hung in the air, nothing ordinary, not the sweet scent of sunscreen or perfume. It was something intense, almost metallic, that entered my lungs and made me feel uneasy. I approached the bathroom, and the smell grew stronger the further I walked. It was as if something was urging me to find out what it was, even though my instinct warned me to retreat. But my curiosity prevailed, so I opened the bathroom door. And immediately I wished I hadn't. There in the bathtub lay a girl slumped, her head tilted to the side. Her half-open eyes stared into space, and her skin was very pale, saturated with bruises on her neck and arms. It didn't take an expert to realize she was dead. The water in the tub had slowly turned into a pink swirl, adding an even more macabre atmosphere to the dreadful sight. I gasped, choked, when confronted with the gruesome scene. I tried to scream, but the scream got stuck in my throat. I was too afraid, too shocked, and it felt as if the air was trapped in my lungs. The smell of iron filled my nose, and I took a step back, feeling like I might slip on the shiny tiles. When I looked at her face again, I couldn't help but notice that she was beautiful, or at least she had been. Her dark hair fell in soft waves, and her eyes were a very bright blue, almost gray. Yet her lips were slightly open, and her face reflected an expression of complete terror. It was as if she had seen something so terrible that her fear was frozen on her face forever. The fear began to overwhelm me. I had to get out of here, had to do something, but the horror before me held me paralyzed. My thoughts raced, and finally I managed to move and called the reception desk, but my voice seemed to be suffocated by the dense air of the room. What the hell happened here? I kept thinking. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me that made me spin around. It was footsteps in the hallway. "I need help," I screamed, feeling the walls closing in around me. The door was half open, and only a small beam of light illuminated the dark path behind me. Then a security guard approached, and I saw that his expression was one of confusion and concern. However, I was unable to say a word and simply pointed my finger towards the bathroom. The guard peered in and immediately stepped back, his eyes widening as he saw the gruesome scene before him. "What the hell?" he murmured, whispering as he retreated, holding both hands over his mouth. Without wasting time, we called the emergency number. Minutes later, the place was filled with screams and chaos. Everything felt unreal, as if we were trapped in a horror movie. The flickering lights of the sirens illuminated the hallway, and the screams of the people echoed through the building. Who could have done something like this? I repeated over and over in my head. There were many unanswered questions and a deep sense of unease. A shadow hung over this place, and I couldn't help but think that this beautiful summer had turned into a nightmare. Every guest in the hotel had their own story, but no one had any idea what had really happened or who the girl was. More importantly, who had done this to her. I wanted to run away, but something held me in place. As if in a trance, I wanted to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. In a last glance before the crime scene investigators entered the room, I could have sworn I saw her eyes flicker. It was as if she were still there, trapped and pleading. But it was nothing more than a play of light and shadow, or the terror frozen in my mind. I staggered out of the room, feeling the walls close in around me. When the police entered room 247, they had serious expressions on their faces. They were trying to process what they had seen. They didn't have to say anything. Everything was obvious. Every disturbing aspect of this room was etched into the carpet, the walls, and the bathtub. Later, I learned that the girl's name was Tyra. She was only 25 years old, just 1 year older than my daughter, which tugged at my heart. She was on vacation with her boyfriend, Mason, a couple from Washington seeking sun and adventure in Thailand. But their vacation turned into the worst nightmare, at least for Tyra. A few hours before her death, Tyra had texted her friends that she had had an argument with Mason. After that, there was silence. No one knew where she was until I found her. Mason had beaten her to death after reading a message she had exchanged with her ex-boyfriend. I don't know exactly what the message said, but it was enough to drive Mason to a crime of passion. He was arrested that same afternoon, but his indifferent expression said it all. He didn't seem to care what he had done, let alone show remorse. He was caught at the airport while trying to board a plane back to the United States. That night, as I tried to sleep, the images of Tyra's lifeless body and the tragedy played out in my head like an endless film. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't block out the image of her face, caught in the faint light in a moment of terror. I continued to work at the hotel, but this experience remained like a tattoo in my mind. Every time I had to enter room 247, it was as if I was reliving the horror. I still pray for Tyra today, hoping that her soul finds eternal peace.